And welcome to Inside Olympia and Happy New Year. It's already been an extraordinary legislative session and it's only week one. The Capitol is closed to the public because of COVID. The building is also fenced off and protected by the National Guard because of security concerns. And lawmakers are holding the session mostly remotely via Zoom, including public hearings. Despite the disruptions, majority Democrats are moving ahead with an ambitious agenda focused on COVID relief, police accountability, climate change, and equity. It's also a budget writing year. In our second half, we'll hear from the Senate Majority Leader, Andy Billig. But joining me first is House Minority Leader, J.T. Wilcox. And welcome back to the program. Good to see you.
Thanks very much, Austin. It's good to be here.
So first question is, what is your reaction and impression as you, and in most states I think, are coming to the Capitol in the midst of this unprecedented security apparatus? A state patrol checkpoint at the entry drive, I think 8-foot or 10-foot perimeter fence manned by or guarded by the National Guard. What's going through your mind?
Well, first of all, checking in that first day, going through checkpoints was a new experience. And, it was cold and rainy, a lot of young state troopers and also, a lot of very young guardsmen. And I've got a son who's been activated for the last 6 months doing food bank and food distribution for the Guard. So I just thought, man, I sure hope that things stay calm and we don't have to ask these motivated young people to be part of, our arguments and our disputes. And thank goodness so far there has been no disturbances since the one that happened about a week ago.
Now, the governor has ordered this security to remain in place at least through Inauguration Day. Is that the right decision?
Well, I think it would be a mistake to ignore the threats that are out there. We live in a time that's full of, some legitimate threats, some make-believe threats, and it's almost impossible for people to separate the two. And so a heightened level of concern, I think, is absolutely necessary. But I think we also need to figure out how do we make that building accessible? How do we look less like we're under siege? And how do we welcome the public back into the process in ways that are more tangible than just through the internet?
What does it say about our political discourse in this country that we've gotten to this point?
Well, I go back to what I said a moment ago. There are real threats, and then there are all kinds of imaginary threats. And we're at the point now where institutions don't have any credibility, and people don't know what to believe. And so they pick their beliefs, based on their ideology, based on fear, based on their friends. And as I said in my opening speech in the legislature this year, there's lots of important policy things to do, and we absolutely have to address vaccinations and also the parts of the economy that have borne the weight of our reaction to COVID. But there is something that ultimately is even more important than those things, and that's to conduct ourselves in such a way that people will begin to find somebody and some things to have faith in. And we've tried, I say we as a society, we as a people, we as a nation, we've tried shaming. Some people have tried violence. We've tried every kind of finger wagging that we can. And I think there's only one thing left, and it's the essence of good leadership, and that is to be the best possible example that we can. And it's a long game. It's not a short fix.
This has been a historic week with a second impeachment. We have a transition of power coming up next week. Where do you think the Republican Party goes from here?
Well, I would go back to what I just said. It is time for all of us to take a breath, really check our rhetoric, decide what's true, what's not, get committed to doing as little exaggeration as we possibly can, and rebuild trust. And also, don't be afraid to speak out as well. I think I've tried to build a reputation especially over this last year, someone that will speak out about threats and political violence, regardless of the source. You don't build credibility by only calling out the other guy. You absolutely have to show principle and have judgment.
What was your reaction to what happened at the U.S. Capitol last week?
Well, I said that the destructive invasion of the Capitol was un-American. To see pictures of people looting, to see the broken windows, to see the threats, to see a gallows erected. The people that did those are criminals and un-American. That doesn't mean that everybody in D.C. was. I think there was a lot of people that went there because they were trying to express themselves and do the right thing. But it doesn't consist of chasing elected representatives into safe rooms, running around with makeshift handcuffs, killing a officer. And then to see the PTSD that those officers are suffering as a result is heartbreaking. We don't even really know what the whole price is.
Yeah. Do you, you're a student of history, and you just mentioned a few minutes ago a lack of trust in institutions. Do you think we're on the brink here, or are the foundations of democracy still strong enough to withstand these tests?
Well, you never know until you're in the middle of it. And I think one other thing that we've suffered from is a lot of false predictions. So I'm not making any predictions, but I this whole year I've been haunted by a chapter in a book by William Manchester, and I may get this wrong, called The Fall of the French Fourth Republic. And he talks about the decline of their country and form of government in the late 30s. And there are some eerie parallels, but history doesn't move in a straight line. It moves in cycles, and we still have time. And this is why I think it's so important for us to conduct ourselves in a way that builds trust. Policies are important, and we have to try hard to pass the priorities that we have as Republicans. We have to fight back when we think that we're going down the wrong path. But preserving our credibility and building confidence is as important as any of those things.
Well, and you often make a distinction between this Washington and the other Washington. What would you say to the public about current relationships between the parties here in the legislature, and for all of the upheaval and distress that people are experiencing and seeing, in Washington, D.C., or in response to what happened in Washington, D.C., how are we doing here?
Well, I think we do much better. We have some signs that things could get worse, but I think, first thing you have to do is to not make every single thing partisan, not exaggerate, and not try to trigger people all the time, whether it's your own friends or the folks on the other side. And I thought that the press availability that House and Senate Republicans did yesterday was a pretty good example. In the very beginning of that, Senator Braun, the new minority leader there, said that he's not questioning people's motives. It's not a terrible rule to have. That's one of the rules of etiquette on the floor. Go after things that are wrong, go after incompetence, poor execution on plans, policies that are harmful. But recognize that most people have pretty good motives. And when you question them, you kind of end the discussion that can be productive. And then I'll take credit for one good thing that I thought I said. That was when we were talking about the disappointing slow pace of vaccinations. We made the point. We need the governor to succeed here. Right? We do not want to be just tearing him down. I would much rather be cheering on an effort by the people of Washington that put us way ahead of the curve on this, that would allow us to get back to a full economy and people having the freedom that they're used to having. And I'm, for one, am not going to cheer at failures in vaccinations or other important things.
Well, one of the first orders of business, it sounds like, for this legislature will be to decide how to spend the federal relief money that's coming in the second package. And Democrats are talking about early action on this. I know it's just a few days in here, but what is your sense of how aligned Democrats and Republicans are about initial COVID relief, especially in light of some of the proposals that your caucus and Senate Republicans made as part of your response to the governor's inaugural address? There was some talk of putting cash in people's pockets, I think a stipend for low-income families with students who are learning at home. Do you kind of see that this will work out and be bipartisan in the end, or is this where we're going to start to see the differences reveal themselves?
Well, I think intentions are somewhat in alignment. We all recognize that there's a problem in the economy. I was really glad to hear over the last week or so some pretty strong acknowledgement from the other side that we absolutely have to address the parts of the economy that have been shut down and have had very little effective relief. I think you're going to see some disagreement in how cash should flow. We'd like it to flow through the economy as much as possible. I think you've seen Democratic policies that are a little more, or in some cases, much more government centric. But I think we all need to be ready to accept the good ideas that are 75 or 80% good, rather than being perfectly pure and having either a bad result or a result that is detrimental to our economy and the people that depend on it.
And have you guys had a chance to run some of your specific policy proposals by the majority party? And do you have any sense yet of the appetite, for instance, for doing some sort of student stipend?
I think we've been talking about those all along, and you've been present at quite a few joint press events where we've been able to expose the ideas to each other. And certainly our members have filed those bills. The committee chairs are ready to, the committee ranking members are asking for hearings for House Republican bills. I think at the very top of the agenda is we have got to provide relief for these immense increases in unemployment insurance, because there can be no bigger bar to bringing people back to work than making it so much more expensive to employ them. And those dollars aren't going into people's pockets. They're going to rebuild a trust fund that has been emptied by two things. The fact that through government action, we've shut down the economy and created unemployment, and also because immense numbers of dollars have been sent to scammers. And that isn't the responsibility of the employers, and it will destroy that part of the economy if they have to pay for something that was never their responsibility in the first place.
But it sounds like there is bipartisan support to try to head off massive increases in unemployment insurance rates.
Yeah, I believe that I am hearing that from the other side as well, but it needs to happen quickly.
Okay. Speaker Jenkins this week said that with respect to vaccine distribution, which you also just referenced, that she thinks the legislature has an oversight role to play, but not necessarily getting into deciding who's going to get the vaccine next. What's your view on this?
Well, I think actually we could pass policy. But at this point, I'm not sure that would help. I saw an article today that said that the Department of Health was thinking about expanding eligibility. I've had a lot of questions from organizations that have been doing vaccinations for decades and aren't approved for this one yet. And clearly, they did not move quickly enough to approve vaccination providers. Some of them are getting that authorization now. And as I said yesterday, I used to dispatch 100 semis a day, so I've been around distribution a little bit, and I've had lots of distribution problems in my own business life. And they are not that easy to fix. But what the chief executive has, or the governor, is the ability to focus attention on the most pressing problem. And I don't think we've got any more pressing problem right now. Certainly lives depend on getting people vaccinated, and every day that goes by without vulnerable people getting vaccine that is in storage in the state of Washington is putting them at an unacceptable risk. And I have called on the governor to use his ability to focus every day create metrics to provide incentives for his organization to increase the rate of vaccination delivery.
Is this the kind of thing that you think the National Guard should be called in to help with? Should sports stadiums be converted into mass vaccination sites?
Well, other states have done that, but as I go back to my business experience, a lot of outside solutions are not always very helpful. I am 100% sure that there is expertise in the Department of Health and in the military department that is involved in our emergency to solve this problem. And the governor can create focus for that. He can unleash them to use their talents. And I will rely on them to do that.
If you had the majority, would you have a bill to override the governor's reopening plan?
Yeah, I am quite sure that House and Senate Republicans would join hands in finding a way to reopen safely rather than concentrating on closure. And we have seen, probably 80% of the economy be able to operate safely. And I thought the governor was doing the right thing months ago when he told people that the major problem was small gatherings. And when you look at the Department of Health tables right now, you see that there were kind of sub-peaks during the times when people get together. The fact that we didn't have a huge spike, I think, meant that people were listening. Keep talking about being safe, teach people how to be safe, have credibility so that they will follow your suggestions, and then continue to reopen the economy by recognizing the efforts that people have made to let people into their restaurants with social distancing and being as safe as possible.
Now, the governor will say people can second guess his decisions, but you can't argue with the fact that Washington ranks 45 out of 50 states in the number of new COVID cases per 100,000 people, at least in the last report I looked at.
Yeah, it's true that we have done a better job of preventing the disease. I wish that we were in the top 5 when it came to providing vaccinations, because that, as everyone has acknowledged, is the ultimate solution. But that doesn't mean that we still can't find ways. I mean, if you can brag about success in preventing the disease, we could also find ways to brag about how can we allow people to make a living clear across the economy and be safe at the same time too.
Okay. New topic. If you were Speaker of the House, would police accountability and police reform be a top priority for the 2021 session, especially in light of the national marches and protests that we saw last year in this vein?
Yeah, I think absolutely it would be silly to ignore the fact that we have a problem in this country and in this state as well. We've had police shootings that were clearly not carried out. If there's a shooting, it's probably not safe. We have found that in some cases the inquiries didn't uncover all of the information. I have a lot of confidence in law enforcement, and I know for sure that an overwhelming majority of people that get involved in law enforcement are good people and follow procedures. But it's absolutely true that there are tragic mistakes made, and we should examine those. We should make sure that we don't have racism involved in something as fundamental as keeping the peace, enforcing the law. And this discussion is good. And by the way, I will remind everybody that Washington was already a national leader in the follow-up to I-940 when House Republicans, Senate Republicans, and House and Senate Democrats came together and produced a large bipartisan bill that put us on track to do a much better job with policing.
There are so many proposals, but let me ask you about one specifically, and that's the governor's proposal to set up a statewide office to investigate and potentially even have state-level prosecution in cases of excessive force or deadly force that are found to not be or potentially not be lawful. What's your appetite and interest in creating some sort of state office that would have oversight?
Well, I think the concept of third-party review and taking it out of a possibly politicized process is absolutely right. And we may not end up supporting a specific agency. However, I think that we're going to be pretty supportive of finding a way, at least within an existing agency, to have third-party, non-politicized review.
What is your thought on helping landlords and tenants? Currently, there's a moratorium on evictions, but that's not rent forgiveness, and that will eventually expire. And there's sort of this cliff, it would seem, that many renters are heading towards. At the same time, landlords, if they're not getting their rent, are in a pinch. I heard from one landlord who wanted to know if there could be a moratorium on local property tax increases, for instance, just to help out so that they're not facing a local property tax increase in the midst of this. But what ideas are on the table, and what kind of help might be in the way?
Well, first of all, let's set the table. The governor's actions have required the landlords to pay the price of our reaction to COVID. They didn't bring COVID to the state of Washington. That's a problem for all of us in Washington. And the moratorium meant that they were going to have to bear the financial burden of this whole thing. And people think that these are all, ultra wealthy people, but a lot of times they're your parents or your neighbors that own a few rental homes, and they can't afford to do this. If we would have come in for a special session, I promise you, one of the major issues that we would have brought up is, okay, we don't want people to lose their housing, so let's use a small part of the rainy day fund and a bunch of the federal money to provide rental assistance so that people are not getting thrown out of their homes. They have the money to pay rent, and the people that own the housing are not going without either.
I know that there will be some money in this early package that will go towards rent assistance or landlord-tenant assistance. What about this idea of halting any local property tax increases or giving more authority? I almost had the indication, I think, from the speaker that maybe the legislature needs to act to give local authorities some flexibility here?
Yeah, I think we would probably endorse that idea depending on the details of that. And, certainly a big part of property tax is the state portion of property tax as well. So it's not just local government who generally have less available resources than the state does. And, some of this also depends on where are those federal dollars going to.
On education, your wife is a teacher. There was a call by the Washington Education Association this week to make school employees move them up in terms of eligibility and not have an age cutoff to get them vaccinated to speed up getting back into the classroom. What's your thought on that idea?
Well, it appears that there is a lot of research coming out from very large sample sizes showing that properly operated schools don't contribute to the spread of COVID. And we have examples in Lewis County in this state and Spokane County of schools that have been operating safely this whole time, or virtually this whole time. So we know that it can be done. I am in favor, I guess, of doing anything at all that we can to get teachers back in the classroom and kids back in the classroom, because the lack of childcare is a huge bar to people being able to get back into the economy. And clearly what is happening with us right now in terms of losing a whole year worth of educational opportunity is something that we're going to pay the price for generations.
Well, we're hearing a lot about that learning loss. I think there's a bipartisan proposal to allow districts to opt into a year-round schedule, at least temporarily, to try to get students caught up. What do you think of that idea?
Well, I think I'd want to hear that one go through the education committee. This is an idea that's been around for a while. I'm absolutely not against it. It's certainly not if it is a local opt-in. But, there's a million good ideas that when you examine them carefully have unintended consequences. And I think that's what the hearing process is all about. I defer to the really good members that I put on the Education Committee.
We'll have a lot of time to talk about budget and taxes in the months ahead, so we'll save that topic for a future interview. But in the last couple of minutes that we have, what's your view? I know it's early, but what's your view so far of how this remote session is working, remote public hearings? What are you hearing from your committee ranking members? I know Republicans were opposed to the emergency rules Democrats passed to allow for a largely remote session.
Well, I am not going to cheer for them to fail. I think it takes a lot of things away that you have in a normal session, but now that we're doing this, our job is to make it as successful as possible for our constituents. And yesterday, I think, was a little bit of a stress test. I heard about some people that were hoping to testify on a bill that was really critical to them. Their power was out. And I checked into it later in the morning, and it turns out that they scrambled and were able to find a way to testify. So that is a testament to their commitment, I think, to testifying on that bill. But it's not going to be possible every time when we have a power outage or some other, kind of technological roadblock for people to be able to find a workaround. And I hope that whenever that happens, we will find a way to reopen hearings or have some accommodation.
And just less than a minute left. These are such unusual times. It is still early in the session, but just a parting thought or two as you close out week one, head into week two, with so much sort of uncertain right now in this country and even in this state.
Well, closing thoughts, same as my opening thoughts. We've got a job to do. We have people that count on us. We have people that are expecting a good job. Some people are expecting a disaster. Our job is to deliver our very best efforts, be as honest as we possibly can, be an example of how to conduct yourself in public, and rebuild confidence.
Okay. House Republican Leader J.T. Wilcox, thanks very much for joining us. We appreciate it.